He did not move when the man first saw him. The lion stood just off the narrow human trail, close enough that his breath could be heard in the still air, yet far enough that instinct kept both bodies locked in place. His chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow, the rhythm broken as if the effort itself had become uncertain. This was not the posture of a predator preparing to charge. His weight leaned backward, muscles tight without intent, as though his body had reached the edge of its own understanding and stopped there. The man slowed without thinking. Years in the field had trained his feet to obey before his mind did. Dust hung low around the lion's legs, disturbed by small, restless shifts of weight. The animal's tail lay close to the ground, not flicking, not lashing, only still. His ears tilted back and then forward again, uncertain rather than alert. One forepaw lifted slightly and set down again in the same place, a motion without progress. Fear moved through him in quiet ways. The lion's eyes tracked the man, wide but unfocused, not fixing on hands or face, but drifting as if the effort to stay upright required more attention than the threat before him. There was a tremor along his flank, subtle enough to be missed by anyone looking for aggression. His ribs showed faintly beneath the coat, not from starvation, but from a long stretch of exhaustion where rest had never fully come. Each breath ended with a soft sound, almost a rasp, quickly swallowed by the open air. The man stopped several paces away. He did not raise his voice or his hands. The space between them felt deliberate, held in place by something fragile. The lion did not step back. Instead, he leaned forward a fraction, drawn by something he did not understand but could no longer resist. Desperation had pushed him here, closer to humans than instinct would ever allow, closer than safety could justify. A low sound left the lion's throat, not a roar, not a warning, but a short, strained exhale that carried confusion more than threat. His jaw opened slightly and closed again. The movement seemed to cost him effort. The man's eyes moved over the animal slowly, reading the signs written in posture and breath. This was a body failing to hold its ground, not one claiming it. "Easy now," the man said quietly, the words barely shaping the air between them. The lion's ears twitched at the sound. His head lowered a fraction, neck muscles tight as though gravity itself had grown heavier. The trail beneath him bore the marks of many passing boots and tires, scents layered over one another, unfamiliar and sharp. He stood there anyway. His paws had brought him this far, and there was nowhere else they seemed willing to go. Wind moved through the grass beyond the trail, bending the taller stems in a slow, patient wave. The lion's whiskers quivered with each breath. His eyes blinked once, then again longer the second time. When they opened, they did not sharpen. They softened, edges blurring as fatigue pulled at him from the inside. The man shifted his weight, careful not to startle. The lion responded with another small adjustment, mirroring without intention. For a moment, neither advanced. The space between them held steady, charged not with danger, but with a quiet, shared pause where fear had nowhere left to run. Somewhere far off, a bird called, thin and distant. The lion's chest rose and fell again, uneven but persistent. As the sun lowered and the light thinned across the trail, the grass whispered against itself, and the lion remained standing, held upright by the last of his strength and the fragile hope that this closeness might mean relief rather than harm. The cub lay where the grass thinned into dust, his body folded awkwardly as though sleep had taken him mid-step. For an animal so young, the stillness was wrong. The savannah carried constant motion, wind through dry stems, insects lifting and settling, distant shapes shifting against the horizon, but the cub did not move within it. His sides did not rise with any visible rhythm. His tail lay slack, its tip pressed into the earth, untouched by curiosity or irritation. The woman noticed him because of that absence. Her work had trained her to read movement first, to let the living landscape announce itself. What stood out now was the quiet pocket where it stopped. She slowed as she approached, not from fear, but from the instinct to avoid breaking something already fragile. The heat shimmered low over the ground, bending the air above the cub's back, making his small form seem even more distant, as if already pulling away from the world around him. Closer now, she could see the fine dust clinging to his coat, caught along his muzzle and between his toes. His ears were flattened, not in warning but in collapse, their edges soft and unmoving. One foreleg stretched forward, the paw half-curled, claws barely visible. There were marks in the dirt nearby, shallow impressions that suggested pacing, stopping, starting again. Adult tracks crossed and recrossed the area, then drifted away, fading into the grass. The cub's breathing, when she finally detected it, was shallow and irregular. It came in faint pulls that barely lifted his ribs before falling away again. His mouth was slightly open, tongue just visible behind dry lips. There was no sound with the breath, only the effort of it. Flies hovered close, drawn by heat and stillness, settling briefly before lifting again when the air shifted. She knelt a few steps away, keeping her shape low and non-threatening. Her shadow fell across the ground but did not touch him. The cub did not react. His eyes remained closed, lashes resting against dust-darkened fur. Whatever energy had once driven him to follow, to play, to call out, had been spent somewhere far from this moment. Abandonment was not always dramatic. Sometimes it arrived quietly, carried on the slow realization that the herd had moved on, that the calls answered less often, that the body no longer kept pace. The cub's thin frame spoke of days measured carefully, of hunger endured rather than fought. His small chest tightened with each breath, then loosened again as though unsure whether continuing was worth the effort. The woman reached out, stopping short of contact, allowing the space between them to remain intact. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. "It's all right," she said softly, not as a promise but as a presence. The cub's ear twitched once, a minimal response, almost accidental. His breathing shifted, pausing for a moment that stretched longer than comfort allowed, then resumed. His head rolled slightly to one side, exposing the curve of his neck, the skin loose there in the way of the very young. The movement seemed to drain him, leaving his body heavy against the ground. Around them, the savannah continued its quiet work. Grass bent and straightened under the passing wind. Somewhere beyond sight, distant shapes moved together, a rhythm of survival that did not slow for one small body left behind. The sun lowered, softening the light, and the air cooled just enough to lift the dust from the cub's fur as the woman stayed beside him, watching the faint rise and fall that meant he was still here for now. The signs became clearer the longer she stayed. Up close, the cub's body told a quiet story that the distance had hidden. His belly was drawn in, the skin there loose in a way that spoke of missed feedings rather than injury. The soft fur around his mouth was dry and stiff, lacking the faint sheen that milk usually left behind. When he shifted, barely lifting his head before letting it fall again, the movement revealed how little strength remained in his neck. She did not touch him. Instead, she settled into the ground nearby, folding herself into stillness so her presence would not add weight to his fragile state. Time slowed into something measured by breath rather than minutes. The cub's breathing remained uneven, sometimes pausing long enough to tighten the air in her chest before resuming with a shallow pull. Each breath felt earned, not automatic. The ground around him held more evidence. Small tracks circled and overlapped, then trailed away in uneven lines. There were places where his paws had slipped, the impressions deeper on one side, as though he had stumbled and corrected himself. No fresh adult prints joined them. Whatever protection had once surrounded him had moved on days ago, leaving behind only the fading record of their absence. The cub lifted his head once more, this time opening his eyes. They were clouded not with illness but with exhaustion, the focus slow to arrive and quicker to drift. His gaze passed over her without settling, then lowered again to the dirt inches from his nose. A faint sound escaped him, not a call but a breath shaped by effort. His body followed the sound, chest tightening, then loosening. The woman listened. She listened beyond the cub, beyond the grass and the insects, stretching her attention outward for the sounds that would change everything. A low-contact call. The movement of many bodies through brush. Any sign that a pride might still be close enough to return. The savannah offered none. Wind moved through the grass in soft, continuous waves, carrying only distance with it. Patience became her choice not because it was easy, but because it was the least disruptive thing she could give him. Intervention carried its own risks, especially now when the cub's survival might still depend on a reunion that had not yet fully failed. She stayed still, allowing the hours to pass without forcing the moment into something final. The cub shifted again, curling slightly inward, as if conserving warmth despite the lingering heat of the day. His tail twitched once, a small reflex, then lay still. Flies gathered and lifted again as she adjusted her position, careful to keep her shadow from crossing his body. When she spoke, it was only once, her voice low and even. "I'm here," she said, not expecting recognition, only offering consistency. The light began to change, stretching longer across the ground, softening the sharp edges of the grass. The cub's breathing slowed marginally, still shallow but steadier. He did not call out. He did not search the horizon. His energy was spent entirely on remaining where he was, anchored to the earth by fatigue and hunger and the quiet weight of being alone. She waited with him as the savannah settled into evening, listening for footsteps that never came, watching the dust drift and resettle, holding space for a pride that remained absent as the air cooled and the world continued, patient and indifferent, around one small body lying at its edge. As the sun slipped lower, the savannah changed in ways that were subtle but decisive. Light softened, stretching shadows into longer shapes that reached across the ground. With the cooling air came new sounds, movement hidden in grass, the distant calls of animals preparing for night. For a cub this small and depleted, the margin for waiting had narrowed. The woman felt it not as urgency, but as a quiet shift in responsibility. She moved closer at last, slowly enough that the cub could register the change without being startled. Her steps pressed shallow marks into the dust beside him, careful not to crowd his space. When she knelt, the warmth of her body entered the still air between them. The cub's ears flicked weakly, registering presence more than intent. He did not pull away. His energy did not allow for it. She removed her jacket and folded it deliberately, placing it on the ground near his side, not over him, not enclosing him. The fabric carried warmth without restraint, offering a boundary that could be accepted or ignored. Her movements were measured, each one separated by a pause that allowed the cub to adjust. When the jacket brushed his fur, just barely, his body stiffened for a moment, then softened again as though resistance required more strength than he had left. His breathing shifted almost immediately. The shallow pulls began to lengthen, the pauses between them smoothing into something closer to rhythm. His chest still rose unevenly, but the effort behind it seemed less strained. The cub's head tilted slightly toward the warmth, a small movement that spoke not of trust but of need. He did not lift himself. He did not attempt to move closer. He simply allowed the contact to remain. The woman stayed still once more, hands resting against her knees, her posture low and unthreatening. She did not watch his face continuously, knowing that stillness itself was part of the offering. Around them, the grass whispered as the evening breeze settled in. Insects gathered in low clouds, their presence constant but unobtrusive. The cub's tail twitched once, then lay quiet again. A soft sound left his throat, barely audible, more a vibration than a call. It was not directed outward. It did not seek an answer. It seemed instead to mark the effort of remaining awake, of holding on. The woman responded with a single, quiet reassurance. "It's all right," she said, the words low enough to blend with the evening air. The cub's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but aware. They lingered on the shape beside him, then closed again. His breathing continued to steady, the rise and fall of his chest becoming more regular, less erratic. The tension along his shoulders eased, muscles no longer locked in readiness or fear. He lay as he had before, but something essential had shifted within that stillness. Night crept closer, carried in the cooling air and the lengthening shadows. The woman remained where she was, offering warmth without enclosure, presence without claim. She did not attempt to feed him. She did not restrain him. Intervention for now was simply this, holding space between danger and rest, allowing his body to recover a fraction of what it had lost. As the last light faded, the savannah settled into its quieter rhythms. Distant movement marked the passage of larger bodies through grass far away. The cub breathed on, each breath steadier than the last, his small form pressed lightly against the borrowed warmth. Above them, the sky deepened in color, and a cool wind moved through the plain, lifting the grass and then letting it fall again, softly, around the two still figures at its edge. The change announced itself before it could be seen. A subtle shift in the air, a disturbance carried low through the grass, reached the woman's attention first. She remained still, allowing the savannah to speak in its own order. The cub stirred faintly, his ears lifting and settling again, as though a familiar signal had brushed against whatever awareness remained to him. From the tall grass beyond, shapes began to separate themselves from shadow. They did not rush. Their movement was deliberate, measured, bodies gliding forward with the economy of animals that did not need to hurry. The pride emerged without sound, their presence unfolding rather than arriving. Heads were held low, eyes forward, not fixed on the woman, but on the small body lying between them. The cub responded before she did. His breathing quickened slightly, then steadied again as if his body recognized something his strength could not yet answer. A faint sound escaped him, thin and brief. It carried no urgency, only recognition. One of the adult lions stepped closer, her posture calm, her tail hanging loose behind her. There was no display of threat, no assertion of dominance. The distance closed slowly, each step placed with care. The woman shifted back inch by inch, careful to keep her movements predictable. She did not rise all at once. She did not turn her back. She allowed the space she had occupied to open gradually, returning it to the cub and those who had come for him. Her jacket remained where it was, no longer central, no longer necessary. The adult lion lowered her head, her nose hovering just above the cub's flank. She inhaled deeply, then touched him lightly, her whiskers brushing his fur. The cub's body responded with a small movement, a tightening and release, as though confirming what scent and sound had already told him. His breathing steadied further, settling into a rhythm that no longer strained against itself. Another lion stepped forward, then another, forming a loose circle that enclosed without pressing. They did not look at the woman. Their attention remained entirely with the cub, with the work of reclaiming something that had nearly slipped away. One of them nudged him gently, encouraging movement without force. The cub's head lifted a fraction, then rested again, the effort minimal but present. The woman continued her retreat, each step backward taken slowly, deliberately, until the space between them widened enough that she became part of the background again. She watched without intruding, aware that this moment did not belong to her. The pride did not acknowledge her departure. Their trust was expressed not through contact, but through the absence of hostility, through the choice to proceed as though she were no longer there. The cub was lifted carefully, his small body supported between jaws and chest, held with precision born of instinct. He did not struggle. His limbs hung loose, his breathing even. The pride turned as one, moving back toward the grass from which they had emerged, their pace unhurried, their formation intact. When they disappeared, the savannah closed behind them, grass rising and settling until no trace of their passage remained. The air grew quiet again, broken only by wind moving low across the plain. The woman stood alone for a moment longer, letting the stillness return fully before she turned away. As the last light faded and the evening deepened, the place where the cub had lain returned to anonymity. Dust settled. Grass whispered. Somewhere beyond sight, the pride moved together through the cooling night, and the savannah held the memory of a brief convergence, long after the ground had gone quiet once more.